Time to pull up a chair. We've got another great story for you today in the rLounge. Life is partly what we make it, and partly what is made by the friends we choose. Today in the rLounge, choose your friends wisely. Am I the a-hole for going through my friend's closet to find my wedding dress? 2 years ago, my husband and I were doing some renovations to our house. I didn't want my wedding dress to get damaged and lost in the process, which, considering we did lose a few things during the renovation, I was right to be concerned. My friend offered to keep it in her closet until the renovations were done. After we finished the renovations, I asked my friend for the dress back. She kept saying she'd get back to me. I kept asking and she'd make up excuses. I found it weird. Now, my sister's getting married and she wanted to wear the dress. This was our mother's dress and we always agreed we'd each wear it. I told my friend I need it back. She claimed she couldn't find it. I was perplexed because how does it just get up and walk away? She apologized and offered to pay me for the cost of the dress, which I turned down because it wasn't about money. The dress was sentimental and I felt terrible my sister couldn't wear it. My friend and her husband went away. I was there to water their plants and feed their dogs. I decided to go look for myself. The closet was very cluttered. I eventually found the dress. I can totally believe that she missed where it was and she wasn't being malicious in the slightest. The box was tucked behind a few larger ones containing seasonal clothes. I texted her saying, "I found the dress." Instead of being happy for me, she asked why I rummaged through her closet. I said I just wanted to double check. She told me I had no right to go through her things. I said that because of her clutter, my sister almost didn't get to wear a dress she always dreamed of. My friend told me that I could have asked her to look again, but I pointed out it took 2 years for her to even look in the first place. Am I the a-hole? Let's see what the judgment ends up being. First up, I would have just taken it and never told her. Let her think she lost her mind. The OP replies, "I don't think she ever would have attempted to find it again." Another person chimes in, "She knew exactly where it was. For some reason, she didn't want to give it back to you. Good for you for finding it, not the a-hole." Someone else says, "But why? Who wants some old wedding dress if it means nothing to them? I think she's a clutterbug that didn't want to take the time to look. I don't know, weird." Someone else says, "Maybe she's a hoarder. Maybe she liked the dress and wanted to keep it. I don't know either. There's really no logical reason for her to want to keep a dress that has no sentimental value to her, but tons to OP and her family." Yet another person says, "I can totally believe that she missed where it was and she wasn't being malicious in the slightest. The box was tucked behind a few larger ones containing seasonal clothes." I texted her saying I found the dress. Instead of being happy for me, she asked why I rummaged through her closet. So interesting that she knew exactly where you rummaged to find this lost dress. OP, I mean this in the nicest way, but you're being naive. She was trying to keep your dress. Simple as that. If all you had to do was go through that closet in her house, it wasn't lost or misplaced. It was exactly where she put it and she knew that. Not the a-hole, but this person isn't your friend. Which, considering we did lose a few things during the renovation, I was right to be concerned. Was your friend over during the renovations? You might need a second chance to rummage at her home before she returns. Next judgment, not the a-hole. If I was in your friend's situation and I genuinely couldn't find the dress, then I would have frankly have invited you to look around for it while you were in the house doing me a favor. But I also am the type of person who would just assume that someone I trust enough to water my plants and feed my dog is also someone I trust in my space. Snooping is a fairly natural instinct, and you had a specific reason for it. Even if she's legit about not liking that you went through her stuff, she went on the defensive immediately instead of being relieved that you managed to find the dress. That just seems suspicious to me. I would say meeting up with your friend to explain and hear what she has to say might be worthwhile, but I wouldn't be surprised if this is the end of the friendship either. The OP was voted not the a-hole. You're totally not the a-hole. Sounds like she just wanted to keep the dress herself. The comments made an excellent choice. When you texted her, you didn't say where you found it, so she knew exactly where the dress was. If she was truly a friend and she had something of sentimental value like that and actually couldn't find it, she should have tried harder to find it and have been way more apologetic for losing it. It's sketchy that she kept coming up with excuses, but also, why keep it? If she was a friend, obviously you'd be invited to the wedding and you'd see her wear it anyways if that's what she planned to wear. Do you think OP's friend knew where it was, or do you think she was hiding it? Moving on. Entitled friend, 45 male, uses guilt to extort me and my wife for gifts, childcare, and cash for years. Hey everybody, first time posting here, but I had posted this in Entitled Parent and my in-real-life friends told me to post it here. I've been listening to a bunch of those narrated posts over on YouTube while I work, and I wanted to share some experiences from a few years ago. These mostly involve me, 33 non-binary, my wife, 36 female, a former friend of mine, Aaron, 43 male, and his son, Ethan. These are set across a 6 or 7 year period. I have way too many of these, but consider these the greatest hits. Shortly after my mom kicked me out at the age of 17, the day after Christmas, don't worry, she'll have her own post eventually, after crashing with my best friend's family, I moved into my first place. It was an absolute slum, but it was only $200 a month total, utilities included. I wasn't there very long, but in that time, I had a couple of roommates, but eventually, my girlfriend, now wife, moved in. Anyway, by chance, we met an old friend of mine who had moved away at the grocery. We catch up, and after a few pretty solid days of hanging out, he introduces us to his friend group. One of these people is Aaron. Aaron was a decade older than the rest of us, but he was a big gamer, loved D&D, comics, fantasy novels, Star Wars, anime, etc., and was basically the older brother of that friend group, who were a bunch of 20-something nerds. My wife and I hit it off with him really well. Despite my description of him, he was a pretty charismatic guy. Well, after hanging out for a few weeks, he'd mentioned that he was the super of the building he lived in. He was, in fact, not the super, and that his parents owned the place, which was true. He let us know that the apartment across the hall from his was opening up soon, and we jumped at the opportunity to get out of the hellhole we lived in. About a month later, we were neighbors. Things started out fine, for the most part. Aaron was recently divorced, and his son, Ethan, who was 1 at the time, lived with him full-time. In the beginning, he worked at the local KFC, and he got free rent from his parents. All he needed to pay was utilities. Well, for whatever reason, I honestly can't recall, he was let go from KFC. From that point on, Aaron wouldn't have a job for the next 4 years. Now, I'm not going to disparage anyone for not having a job. It's happened to me. However, Aaron, at the time, was more than capable of working. He just didn't. Instead, he played a lot of games, especially MMOs. He was always hitting up his guildies for cash or gifts. However, this got to the point where people would stop playing with him altogether. During this time, he'd often hit me and my wife up for money and gifts as well. On top of that, anytime we'd head to the groceries, he'd hand us gift cards and things and expect us to bring him home food too. Literally every time. I live in a very walkable city and don't drive, so we'd be carrying back food for this guy and his kid. Anytime we didn't, he'd throw a huge tantrum, the dad, not the son, and talk about how we were taking food out of his son's mouth or punishing him for being a parent. Because my wife and I are child-free, he'd say we didn't understand because we hated kids. We don't hate kids, mind, and little Ethan was basically like a nephew to us. Every once in a while, he'd also convince some of our driving mutual friends to take him on grocery runs, but those only happened maybe 2 or 3 times per friend because they wouldn't put up with him like we would. That all came to a head when he tried to guilt trip some of our friends, streamers, on stream at 1 a.m. for not dropping everything to drive across town, pick him up, and buy him dinner. Yes, buy him dinner. This is 3 days after they bought him a $300 gaming chair because his fat butt broke his. That, and driving across town to build it for him too. When I say his fat butt, I really mean it too. He was pushing 500 pounds. Now, I'm pretty heavy myself. A lot of my friends and family are. I completely get it. However, one of the things he did was constantly eat out. Really big meals at buffets, or ordering multiple pizzas, stuff like that. He said he liked cooking, but he basically never did. This did not help his weight, and it very much didn't help his budget. During this time, and later when he finally got his new, short-lived job, he was always asking my wife to watch Ethan while he went out to who knows where. We're talking 5 to 10 hours at a time, sometimes for days on end. She saw Ethan more than Aaron did. We were there for diaper changes, baths, potty training, meals, all of it. My wife basically raised him. All of this without pay other than him occasionally buying us some food. Because his divorce was insanely bad, his wife tricked him into having Ethan by lying about birth control, stole his car and crashed it, resulting in him losing his car and having his license revoked, and then cheating on him with his best friend and running away with him. He was super depressed all the time. He was allergic to mushrooms, so he would always say, "As soon as Ethan was graduated, I'm going to buy some magic mushrooms and end it all." Really messed up stuff like that. His place was always torn up as well. The grossest place I've ever seen, and he'd convince my wife and me to clean it for him. Once again, using his son as a guilt trip. Somewhere along the line, he had let Ethan pee all over the floor and spilled juice and stuff, so his carpeted floor was always covered in mildew. The bathroom was a wreck as well, covered in human waste, grime, and more. There were also toys and trash everywhere. Both he and his son slept on mattresses on the floor as well because they had to get rid of their bed frames. Why, you may ask? Because of the bed bugs. These bed bugs plagued our building for years, but he wouldn't report them to his parents because he said they'd kick him out if he or we did. He had a washer and dryer provided by his parents, unlike the rest of the units in the building, but the dryer broke about 2 years after we moved in, and he wouldn't report it to his parents for the same reason. This meant that he and his son wore wrinkled, mildewed clothes all the time. It got to the point where he convinced my wife to take their clothes whenever she went to the laundromat too, and of course, she was paying. Somewhere along the line, he got bitten by a spider on his leg, which nearly had to be amputated due to necrotizing. This was apparently a combination of him not going to the ER soon enough and something about his diabetes. Luckily, after making all these plans with us to take care of him throughout his recovery, his leg was intact. However, he would then go on to use his rotten leg, his words, to milk more sympathy out of everyone around him. Thankfully, his dad, who also owned some local car washes, ended up hiring him to be a car washer to bring in a bit of money here and there. Don't get me wrong, his parents were abusive a-holes, I get it. But after working there 1 year, he got into a huge fight with his dad about being late all the time, and quit. At this point, his dad also started charging rent. Because of that whole debacle, we started making big meals for both households to keep his food costs down, all while providing free grocery pickups, childcare, laundry service, cleaning, etc. By this time, Ethan was in school as well, so my wife would walk him to and from before taking care of him in the evening. We also started giving them $500 a month to help him get back on his feet, with the promise he'd look for a job. Right out of the gate, he said he wouldn't do anything that had him on his feet because of his rotten leg. Fair, I guess. But he also wouldn't work a temp job or at a call center. Also, because of not driving, it had to be within walking distance, but not too far because of the leg and his weight. So the only jobs he could do were online. So instead of looking for data entry or something, he decided he wanted to be a streamer. F me. That summer, his AC broke along with his oven. Again, instead of reporting it to his dad, the landlord, who was responsible for these things, he begged me and my wife to pay for the fixes. Well, around this time, I got an offer to move into an apartment complex literally only 3 miles away that was exclusively for artists. I was a full-time artist, working in game dev and doing some freelance photography and graphic design on the side. So this was a huge opportunity for me. Well, guess what? He started guilt-tripping me and my wife about it, saying that if we moved away, he'd never see us again, and that we were being unfair to Ethan. 3 miles. That's all. Honestly, I guess he was right, but I'm getting ahead of myself. By this time, all of my friends had had enough of him. They figured that he was fun enough to hang out with, but he started being a dick to all of them too. Like for instance, storming out of multiple D&D games because he didn't like how they were going and not playing for months before coming back like nothing ever happened, and then doing it all again. No one but me and my wife would even talk to him after all that. So, knowing what an opportunity moving into this art collective would be, my friends had an intervention with me. They explained that I was being manipulated, and that instead of helping him and his son, I was being an enabler, and that I needed to move and support my family. Well, with much protest from Aaron, we moved. However, I would still go for visits, and my wife still occasionally sat for Ethan. We also still paid him $500 a month. That was until I gave him a cookbook about cooking on a budget, and he lost his crap. I told him that I really wasn't comfortable with him wasting all the money I gave him on junk food, and that he should at least try to cook healthy for him and his son. At this point, Ethan was getting bullied for being overweight, and his teachers had started saying things. I told Aaron that I wasn't going to enable him and that if he wanted my help, he was going to need to make changes. He was furious, saying I was just like his dad, who had abused him physically, psychologically, and financially his entire life, and that he was going to do whatever he wanted with his money, and that if I stopped paying him, that I was abusing his child. He told me that if I was going to do that, he'd never speak to me again, and that would be unfair to Ethan. I straight up told him that he was bull and that we can still be in each other's lives. But at this point, I felt I needed to remove money from the equation, and he told me that I was making this decision to never see him again. But that was enough. I told him to have a good life. A few years later, I got a phone call from him asking about helping him get into his Minecraft account, which I had gifted him, but I couldn't help. And also I got a message from Ethan asking if we could see each other. I didn't respond because I didn't want to risk being manipulated by his dad again. I literally still get stress nightmares about him nearly a decade later. I know that a lot of this was my fault for not setting boundaries, but I didn't know that at the time. I'm just trying to move on now. And that move I made? Best thing I have ever done. The collective helped support my indie game studio, so we're doing good things, including showcasing at the freaking Smithsonian, and now I'm the property manager for the building, and I also manage their community gallery. Seriously life-changing stuff. I hope this was a good post. If you'd like more about Aaron, Like the time he bashed a door into my head repeatedly because I wouldn't take Ethan to the movies on our adults-only trip? Him, me, my wife, and another friend, despite his sister agreeing to babysit? Let me know. Thanks for reading. Edit. Here are a few common things that have come up in the comments and I wanted to clarify. CPS was involved. Ethan was considered a happy, healthy kid, and CPS has limited resources. Aaron didn't beat him, didn't even spank him. Compared to most of their cases, CPS was fine with all this. They just gave lists of things to be improved that always were by their next visit. Yes, Aaron was a crappy person, but low on the totem pole by CPS's standards. The reason I put up with this is largely because this started basically right after high school for me. Up until that point, I was living with my own abusive, narcissistic mother. Aaron made us feel like he was family, and before we knew it, I'd slipped back into a similar situation like the one I was in with my mother. Abuse sucks and doesn't always make sense unless you've lived it. As for my wife, her story is her own, and I won't speak on it. That was many years ago. Now that we're out, my wife and I have had therapy and have grown to the point where we can set boundaries and cut out parasites like Aaron and my mom out of our lives. We've moved on. I didn't post this for sympathy or pity. This was a lifetime ago, for me. I posted it because I recently dove into listening to a bunch of these narrated on YouTube, and they reminded me of my former situation, and I hoped you guys would get something out of hearing my account the way I've gotten something out of listening to others. Now let's get a reaction from the community. I'm not going to lie, Aaron is a huge a-hole, but I have absolutely no pity for people like you. You let someone walk all over you and your wife, and for some strange reason, you let it keep happening. For years at the time, it seems. He definitely needs therapy, but so do you and your wife. You need to learn to self-respect and to be a bit more selfish. DOP replies, the strange reason is because I was raised by an abusive narcissist who spent every waking moment of her life letting me, a child at the time, know that the only value I would ever have was if I was exactly the person she wanted me to be. Being raised in an environment like that does things to you fundamentally. Because of our similar upbringing, I saw Aaron as a kindred spirit of sorts, and never realized I was being thrown into the same cycle of abuse that I had only just recently escaped. I have, since my time with Aaron, learned self-respect, as this was a few years ago. I get it. You saw yourself in Aaron in some way due to what you went through with your own mother, and a lot of times we try to fix people like that, but his parents owned the building and let him live there for free. Is that abusive? Was he entirely telling the truth? I suppose we'll never know, but as you acknowledged, you did enable him, and you did it for a long time while also in some way neglecting your own family and your own abundance. Nobody can help Aaron but himself. Thankfully, you got out of there when you did. What do you think? What would you have done? Thank you for following along today. Before you go, be sure to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell. If you have something you want to share regarding today's content, we want to hear it. Until next time, in the rLounge.